Hello Brushaholics, it is Robert from the Brush Bar. I'm going to be leading you through today's video. The kit that you have right now is our Saguaro and Bloom painting. It is the one that I have right here for you guys. So I hope everyone is doing really good, and I hope this brings a little creativity into your life today. Now in your kit you should have everything that you need. There's just a couple things that are not in it, like a water cup, just somewhere to place your brushes when you're done with them. It can be an old cup, so it doesn't have to like be something that you're very fond of, just because it will get a little bit messy, just to put your brushes in, or if you ever need some water to help you with the painting process. The other thing I do suggest is also having something to wear, like if you have an apron or you have some clothes that you don't mind getting dirty, just because this is a dirty process, so we don't want you to ruin any clothes while you're working at home. And also find a spot maybe that has some space, so that way you don't have to worry about getting paint on anything or anything like that. Now I do have an easel here. If you have one, you can prop it up on that. If not, you can lay it flat on a surface and paint. I do that all the time at home. It works okay just like that as well. Just make sure that you got good support when you're sitting down, so that way your back doesn't get tired throughout this. But I will be taking you through this painting. This is the kit painting. Again, it's Saguaro and Bloom, and I'll tell you all the details that you need for that. Now, what you should have in your kit is a couple things. First thing you're going to have is some palettes here. These are what you're going to put your paints when you're mixing on. So you'll have those. You're also going to have a blank canvas, so that's going to be in your kit to paint on. And then we're also going to have some brushes too. So there's 5 there. There's different ones, so you can use them for different steps. I always like to say in class when you're in studio, if you need a different brush, if it's too big, or one's just a little bit more comfortable to you, you're more than welcome to use that. But I do give suggestions on what brush to use throughout our process today. You also have some napkins in there too, so all of that stuff is included in there. But I guess we will go ahead and Alright, so we will get started with painting. The first step we're going to be doing is kind of working our background into our canvas. So it is this light brown that you see here. You can always change up the colors too if you want to make something a little bit different. That is more than welcome. What I'm going to do is give you the mixture here on my palette. That's where you'll mix it, and then what we'll do is I'll give you the techniques and stuff like that. If you ever feel like you need to pause the video, that is perfectly fine. I'm going to work my normal pace, but if you have troubles keeping up or anything like that, feel free to pause it until you do, and then you can go on to the next step and stuff like that. So first step, again, like I said, we're going to do our background. So in order to do that, you're going to grab your largest brush. The bristles look like a little rectangle here. That's what we're going to be using to cover a lot of surface areas. So that's the one that you'll use first, and you're going to make your very first pile of paint too. So what I'm going to do is on here, I'm going to grab a big scoop of that brown that we have. So I'm just going to step to the side here and grab my paint real quick. When I'm doing this, I want to make sure that I'm grabbing a pretty big scoop of these paints, because you're going to have to remake them if you don't get enough paint, and sometimes the colors don't match. So it's best to start with a big amount, so that way you can cover big surfaces. So brown is going to be the first color, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a scoop of white paint into it. So I've got my paint in there. I'm going to mix it right on the palette. Now when you are doing this, just make sure that you make it very small, so that way you don't use your whole palette with one color. Now with this, it is going to be a very light tan. You can kind of see it in the background here. This is what I mixed together, and I feel like I need it to be a little bit lighter, so I'm going to add some white paint into it. So if your color doesn't look like mine or kind of what you're seeing on camera, just go ahead and adjust it. You can add more colors into your pile, and that will just help. You don't want to do it on the canvas just because it's harder to control, so I do it right here in the palette. So for me, I'm going to add another scoop of white paint into there, and then I'll just mix it up. Again, I'm looking for that really light kind of tan color. So this is what I've got right here. So it's very light, because our cactus is going to be popping from that as a darker color. So once I have that and I'm happy with it, all I'm going to do is start at the top of the canvas here, and I'm just painting from side to side to kind of put that color in there. And I'm just working my way down the canvas. I'm gonna go with kind of even brush strokes. So if you see like lumps in there, it just means that there's too much paint on the canvas. You wanna make sure that you're getting an even layer on there. That way it all dries at the same time. So I'm gonna cover mine real quick, and then I'll come back for you guys and I'll give you the next step. So as you can see, I have my background completely covered now. I went from the top all the way down to the bottom of my canvas and just filled in the whole thing. Now when you are working, sometimes you might find that your paint's hard to spread, so one thing that you can do is add a little bit of water into it. These are water soluble paints, so what that's going to do is just help them to get a little bit thinner so it's easier to spread. So if you're like running out of a certain color, or maybe you just find that the paint is very thick, if you add some water into it, it's just going to help it to spread. You don't want to add a ton of it because you don't want it to be super transparent or just dripping down your canvas. You want it to have a little bit of integrity still to the structure of the paint, but a little bit of water will just help you to cover your entire background. Now one thing that I do like to say when you are painting is you want to get the sides too. So we got the canvas actually wraps around a frame, so you want to get the top edge, the two sides, and the bottom. It just makes it so when you hang it up, the sides are covered and it doesn't look blank, it doesn't look unfinished, so that just helps it look a little bit better on the wall when you're ready to hang it up. Now, this is a point where I tell people that we take a break for class. We need to allow this to dry because if we go into the cactus next, what's going to happen is these paints are going to mix together, they're going to change the colors and not give us exactly what we want. So we are going to take a break. You're going to take about 5 or 10 minutes for your break. Now, one thing I do to check my canvas to see if it's dry is if you hold it to like a light source and kind of go like that, you can actually see it on mine. If you see that kind of sheen to it or that shine, that's the paint that's still wet. You'll see the spots that are still need to dry a little bit longer. You can always take a hair dryer and go on this for like 5 or 10 minutes, and that will also help. Actually, you probably don't even have to do it that long. You can probably do it just like 2 minutes and everything will be dry for you. But this is the point where you do want to take a break, let it dry, and then we'll go on to the next step. Alright, so for our next step, everything should be dry on this. What we're going to be doing is building our cactus next. So this is going to require a different brush for you. This is the next largest brush in your bundle. Let me kind of show you the shape of it on camera. You can see it's got a little bit more of a rounded top rather than a flat top like our last brush. So we're going to use this one. We are going to make a new color, so just find somewhere new on your palette. You're going to do a big scoop of green first. This is going to be your color. And then to that, I add a half a scoop of white paint. So full scoop of green, and then whatever you got in that, you'll do half of it in white paint, and you're just going to mix it together and get our base color for our cactus. So this is kind of what I'm getting here. You just want to make sure it's not too light. It's a little bit like a medium green. It's got a little bit of a blue tint to it, and that's okay. This is just going to be the first color that kind of sets up everything for us. So before we go on to the canvas, one thing I always like to say when you're drawing shapes is there's a couple tips that you can do just to help you out with your brush. So one thing is just holding it a little bit closer to the bristles. Usually I hold it kind of where the wood meets the metal. That just helps me so I can control my lines a little bit better, draw my shapes, and then they're not quite as bumpy if I want them to be really, really straight. And also there's a couple different ways that you can hold your brush. So one way is the normal way, that wide side, which is going to give you a wider line like that. Or if you take your brush and kind of flip it on its side, you can actually see the difference. So if I flip it on the side, it's a little bit thinner, that edge. As long as I just use enough pressure to do the ends of the bristles touching the canvas, I can get a thinner line. So I like to work with my thinner line first, drawing the shape, and then afterwards what I'll do is I'll use the wider portion to fill everything in. So for our cactus, let me show you the example real quick just so you can see what we'll be doing. We're going to start with the trunk first, so you can see that that's a little bit of a wider trunk. It goes from the top to the bottom of the canvas. You don't really see the top of it. It just goes right off the edge there. Now for measurements, there's a couple different things that you can do for this. Let me put this back up here for you guys to see. What I do is I actually use my hand to measure things out. So this goes directly in the center. What I like to do is, let me put my palette down real quick. Right in the center, you can do it like at the top or the bottom if you feel that you want it to be spaced out nicely is I use my hand. So generally it's like my hand kind of relaxed. I'll just put it right in the center of the canvas, and then I take my brush and kind of mark on both sides, so I know kind of how wide I want it to be. Because you want to leave some room for the arms later on, and you want to have enough space in between them just to have some flowers and thorns and stuff like that later on. So again, we're going to draw the trunk first. It's going to go right in the middle, and I'm going to just eyeball this just because I've done it a bunch, so I kind of know where to place it. But again, make those little marks, and then from there you can draw a line straight down. So I'm just going to take my brush right up here at the top of the canvas and draw it down to create that line. And then I can do the same thing on the other side. And I already know that mine is too thin, and I need to change it a little bit. So what I can do is I can just extend it a little bit like that. And then I can do the same thing on the other side and then fill it in. So I'm just going to step in front of the camera real quick, kind of adjust mine real quick so you can see it, and then I'll start to fill it in. So pardon my back real quick. But I'm just going in there and just kind of fine-tuning what I want the edge of this to be, so I know exactly what I'm going to fill in. So I'm adjusting it, making it a little bit straighter. So there I go. That's going to be my trunk. And you can always make it wider. It's best to start off smaller, I say, with our paintings, just because it's harder to erase because this is a lighter color, this is a darker color. The next thing is going to be the arms. So again, I'm going to take my example down here. Whoopsies. The arms, you can see, are kind of like the letter L. You can see it in here, kind of that letter L that I've got going on. I'm going to draw that, and I'm also going to, on one edge, it's going to go and kind of see the top of it. Usually I leave a couple inches from the top of this arm, and then the other one goes off the canvas there. Now they both hit the side of the canvas too, so you're not going to have a space in between the left or the right side of the canvas and the cactus. Those are just going to butt up right against that. But let me show you kind of my technique for that. What I'm going to do is, again, taking my brush kind of on that thinner side, I'm just going to draw these in. So I like to start with the one that the kind of top is not showing. So that is going to be on our left side here. I'm just taking my brush, I'm going to go out a little bit of the ways, and then I'm going to go up from there, making sure to leave a gap in between, so that way there's some space in between and you can differentiate the arms from the trunk. Then I'm going to finish this by going down a little bit from here, maybe a couple inches, and I'm going to take my brush and kind of mimic this line. It's going to go out, it's going to curve and hit that side, and I'm going to leave it like that. And then this, I'm just going to fill in so it's completely solid. Same thing with the trunk. This can also be filled in completely solid. For this arm over here on the right, you can always adjust them. You can make it a little bit higher or off place, so that way they're not at the same level. But it starts the same way. So I'm going to take my brush, and maybe I want it to start here. I'm going to go out to the side and start to go up from there. And then, before I get to a couple inches from the top, what I'm going to do is draw the outside edge of that end of the arm. So I'm just taking my brush and kind of doing this rounded shape at the end. Kind of looks like a frowny face, and it goes right to the edge of the canvas. And then I just come down here and kind of do the same thing. I'm going to place the elbow in there. So I'm taking my brush out, kind of doing that curve until it hits the side of the canvas. Now I've got my shape in place. What I'm going to do is fill this in so it's completely solid. So I'm just taking my paint and kind of filling it in like a coloring book. Just kind of going to go in there, fill in the arms, fill in the trunk. So I'm going to do mine real quick. I will pause you guys, or for you guys it'll be right away, but I'll come back when mine is all the way painted. Alright, so now I've got my cactus filled in. It kind of looks like Gumby right now, but we're going to change it by adding in some texture into it. So if you look at the example here, what we have is a little bit of shading and highlight in there. So there's some darker colors in there, there's some lighter ones, and it gives it that look like there's some ribs in the cactus. So that's what we're trying to accomplish right now. We're going to be using the same brush that you were just using, so you don't have to worry about grabbing a new one or rinsing it off either. And what I'm going to do is I'm using the green right off my palette. You don't have to do any color mixing right now. It is just that green off of our palette. What we're going to be doing is working with kind of vertical stripes or strokes in there. And what I'm gonna do is think of my cactus finding a light source. So my example, all the darker colors are on the right side and all the lighter colors are on the left side. And it just makes it look a little bit more three-dimensional. It gives it a little bit more lighting so those barrels or the arms kind of look like they are rounded, kind of fools the eye. So we're gonna start with some darker colors first. Again, it's just the green off my palette. I'm gonna take some of that paint on there. Now when you're doing this, what you're gonna do is follow kind of the shapes that you've got in there. So you wanna make sure that in the parts that are running from up to down, you're just doing vertical lines in here. You don't wanna do a diagonal or a horizontal line. And then in the arms, the same thing, except when you get into the little elbow of the cactus here. You wanna make sure that it is bending with that and kind of going the same direction. So let me show you a couple ways that we're gonna do this. So again, like I said, I'm gonna put my darker colors on the left side of the cactus right here. It might be a little bit different video-wise for you guys. It might look like the right side, but pretty much you want to make sure that all your dark colors are on one side, all the lighter colors are on the other. And you can do this a couple different ways. You can do it with bigger brush strokes, so using the wider portion of your brush. So let me show you a couple ways that I can do this. I can go in there and just add like some random streaks in there like that, or you can flip it on its side and get some thinner ones. But what I'm essentially doing is putting in some blobs of color that run in that direction that you're working with. And it's not gonna go from like the bottom all the way to the top. It doesn't have to be a continuous line. There can be some breaks in there too. It'll make it look a little bit more natural. So let me do a couple on mine just so you can see kind of what I'm working with. I'm just kind of going towards that left side. You can start to go in towards the right as well, but as you get into the right side, it gets less and less. So that way the cactus is darker in each segment on one side first. So I'm just kind of going in there. I'm putting different lengths of brush strokes in there. Sometimes I'll go over them a couple times to soften them. That blends it a little bit. Or sometimes I'll just leave them kind of harsh so that way I get a little bit of texture in there too. Because if you blend everything or go over it multiple times, it all turns into one color. So you want to have that darker color poking through. But there's kind of like a little example on my trunk. I can go on the arms kind of doing the same thing. So as I'm working on this side, it's still going from up to down. And then as I get into this curve, I'm just making sure that my brush strokes are also curving that way as well. I'm going to do that to this one, and I'm also going to do that to this one over here. So let me do mine real quick, and then I'll come back to you guys. Alright, so you can see now kind of what I went through. I've got those accents on the left side of my cactus, on the arms, the trunk, kind of using that to give it a little bit more texture. We're going to do another color, another darker color, so you can overlap it into these ones. You can kind of go in the space that doesn't have any. But we're going to add a second color into there. So this is the same brush. You don't have to rinse it off. It will be a new pile of paint. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a scoop of the green that we have and a scoop of the brown. So the dark brown and the green, I'm just doing equal scoops of both of those. What it's going to give you is this right here. It's kind of hard to see, but it's like a dark army green is what I'm working with. Now the more brown that you put in it, the darker it's going to be. So I'm just going to pretty much do the same process that I just did using a little bit of a darker color. So I'm just going in there and adding some more ribs in there or lines, chunks of colors, just to give the cactus a little bit more shape. As I get over towards the right side of whatever section I'm working with, there's just less and less, so that way that side will be lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in mine real quick, and then I'll come back to you guys. Again, it's just a scoop of green, scoop of brown. You can add more brown into it if you need it to be darker, but I'm just kind of overlapping it into the area that I just worked with. So not covering up all of that color, allowing some of the last one to pull through, but I do want to have a little bit of both colors kind of working in there. So I'll let you guys work on them, then we'll come back into the next step. Alright, so I got my second color in the darker section in there. Now we're going to start to work on the opposite side, putting in some lighter accents into the cactus. I'm going to use the same brush, maybe rinse it off in your water cup just to get some of the darker color out of it. And then you can use your napkin to draw out any paint. It doesn't have to be perfectly clean. We're going to still work with a green, but I do like to get a little bit of that darker color out. If I have a lot on my brush, Also, as you're working with your brushes, you want to make sure that when you're done with them, you're putting them in your water cup. It just helps them to be preserved, so that way they don't get kind of crunchy on you, and you can still use them. You just rinse them off in the water cup. So that bigger brush that we used before, just go ahead and put it in your water cup right now for safekeeping, and then we will go on to the next part. The next part, like I said, is adding in some lighter accents. So we're putting this on the opposite side that we just worked with. So I'm gonna go on my right side for me, and I'm just making a new pile of paint. This is gonna be 3 colors together. It is a scoop of green, you've got a scoop of white paint, and also a scoop of yellow. So just to repeat that, it's a scoop of green, scoop of yellow, and a scoop of white. What you're gonna get is this color right here. It's like a chartreuse or a very light lime green. It also looks like guacamole, which is also a yummy thing. So if it looks something similar to that, that is great. You can always adjust it too if you need it to be lighter. You know, use more of the white and yellow than the green. But what I'm gonna do is the same technique. I'm just working onto the opposite side of my cactus now. So I'm taking my brush, kind of doing the same thing by putting in some lighter accents into there. And also, you can overlap this slightly into your darker ones too. So not all of them have to be just on this right side. I do go slightly into my darker ones, less and less as you get over to that side, just so they look like they're a little bit blended and you don't have kind of like light and dark kind of separated. So we want to make sure that we're adding just a little bit into that darker section. But I'm just kind of going and following the same pathway just like we did before. You can add as much or as little of this color as you want. Same thing with the arms, so just kind of going in there and starting to put my color. You're just going to follow the elbow and the shape of the sections that you're working in. But let me go ahead and put mine in real quick, and then I'll come back to you guys. Alright, so this is kind of what I've got with mine. You can see I've got those lighter accents in there on my cactus. For the next part, we're going to be working with the flowers. Now, this is a time where you might have to take a second break just to allow these colors to dry before we get into the flowers. Otherwise, your flowers aren't going to be kind of the colors that you see up here. So these whites, yellows, and oranges, they'll get kind of muddy because the green isn't dry. So you just want to make sure that you're taking a little bit of a break, allow that to dry a little bit more. You know, maybe find some good music right now, take a sip of wine if you've got it, or go get some snacks. But we're just gonna let this dry a little bit. The brush that you were using, we can put that in the water cup when you are finished with it. But kind of showing you a little bit closer up of what I've got here. I got, you know, my lighter colors on one side. They do overlap a little bit onto the darker colors, less and less as you get to the darker side. But you can kind of see that in my painting here. This is also a time before you go on the break. I always like to suggest if you need to revisit colors, like say you covered up a lot of the original color, you can remake that or use it off of your palette and going there and just put some of those or the darker colors or the lighter colors. Like sometimes people will say that the lighter colors are very bright and they don't kind of mix in. So what you can do is go back into your darker colors too, and that will just help to tone things down. So that's one thing that you can do before you do take your break for your painting, so that way it does have some time to dry. So if you want to go into some previous colors, they're all on your palette there. You can also rewind the video, I'm sure, and kind of see the paint mixtures if your piles are dried up. But you'll do that and then you will let it dry. So I will let you guys go on our break, and I would say about another 10 minutes for your break, dry break, maybe a little bit longer. If you do that, got that hair dryer, that will definitely come into handy right now, so it dries it a little bit faster. But we are going to let it dry for just a little bit. I will come back when mine is dry, and we'll move on to the next part, which is going to be flowers. Alright, so I've given mine a little bit more time to dry, just so I can make sure that the greens are nice and dry, because the first color that we're going to be using for the next part, which is the flowers, is going to use white paint, then we go to yellow, and then orange. So we don't want any of this to get in there. Now the brush that you are using is this one right here. This is called your round brush. It's one of the pointy ones. If you look on the side, it even says number 6 round, but this is the one that I'm going to be using. If you want, you can use that baby brush if you feel like you have a heavy hand. That will help to give you smaller lines if you're really, really nervous about this. But let me grab my example and show you kind of the flowers, whoopsies, and kind of what we're dealing with. So, sorry, I'm going to get a little bit close here, but this is what I'm working with. I've got these flowers that are really, really kind of pretty. They've got 3 different colors in them. I've got them in the armpit there. I've also got one sitting at the top of this one right here. If you take a look at my flowers, you can see down here, they're kind of facing in different directions. They're different numbers. So like this bunch right here, I've got one that goes up in the center. I've got one that goes off to a little bit of a diagonal. Maybe this one goes off to the side. Same thing with this one over here. It goes to the side a little bit just to make it look a little bit different. Now, if you wanted to just do the one on the top of here, you're more than welcome to do that. And also, you don't have to use these colors too. So this is white, yellow, and orange, and I'll show you this process in just a second. But if you want to do a different color of flower that is in your kit, you're more than welcome to do that. But this is what we're going to create next. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you with a darker color on a palette kind of my technique that I'm using so you're able to see it a little bit easier. Now when you are using your brush, it is really important that you use very light pressure, because the harder that you push down, I don't know if you can see this, but if you push your brush down, what happens is it splays out more. So we go from a thin line like this to a wider line. So you just want to make sure that you're pushing very, very lightly, maybe just enough so the ends of the bristles is just touching your canvas. You're going to use white paint for the first color that's in here. I'm going to use a little bit of a darker color on my palette first to show you the technique, and then I will use the right color afterwards. So don't use black paint. That's kind of what I'm going to use, so it's a little bit easier to see, but you want to use the lighter color. So let me show you, I'll show you over here in the corner kind of how I'm going to create this with a little bit of a darker color. So when you're doing your flowers, what you're going to be doing is kind of flicking your brush up. So if I do it right here, you can kind of see I'm taking my brush and flicking it. And what happens is you have a wider part where it starts, and then it's thinner as you get to the end. And that's because I'm using less pressure as I'm getting to the end of my brush stroke, and I'm doing that little bit of a flick with my wrist. So let me grab a little bit of brown paint. I'm also going to grab a new palette just so I can make a bigger version for you guys. So, okay, let me use the back of this right here. So what you're going to do is you're going to find the middle of where you want your flower to be in your painting. And what I usually do is I just give myself a little bit of a dot so I know where that is, and I can build the petals from there. The next part is coming, which is the flick. So you're taking your brush, and whatever direction you want the flower to be, you're going to start by flicking up in the middle of it first. So let me do it a little bit larger so you can see. So that's kind of where I start. And then from there, I'm just doing more of those, just kind of around it. And they're doing these little curves, and I can repeat the same thing on the other side, kind of building up that flower. And that's kind of what I'm getting right there. So I don't know if that was difficult to see, but I'll do a little bit close up of that. You can see those little flicks kind of creates like a little blossom in there. These lines that are on the side here are a little bit more curved, so that way everything is trying to meet towards this bottom and then flares out more towards the top there. So that's kind of my technique. Let me show you on my canvas how to do it with the proper color and kind of some examples of where you can go with this. So again, you're going to use white paint for this. If your white is getting kind of dirty from dipping in the other colors, you know, like mine, I'm just kind of dipping in the center there, so that way I'm avoiding the other colors. Sometimes you can even kind of take another brush and just kind of wipe some of the other paints away, and underneath it will be some fresh white paint. But I'm just taking some white paint on that brush, kind of loading it up, and then I'm going to decide where I want my flowers. So maybe I want them in the armpit here. I'm going to start with one that kind of faces upwards. So I'm taking my brush, kind of putting my dot where I want that first one to be, and then I'm going to go from there. So I'm again just flicking my brush upwards, and then from there kind of creating the ones on the side by just doing these little kind of curved lines coming from the base of where I started. So there's one there. I can do a second one if I wanted, maybe to the side, so maybe we'll do one right here too. So I'm just taking my brush and starting to create the shape. Maybe it's going a different way. It's okay if they overlap like that. So maybe I want two right there. It kind of looks like one big flower, but I'll change that in a second. And then maybe I'll have one right over here, so I can make it facing kind of a diagonal and stuff. But I'm just going in there and flicking my brush. You can make them different sizes too. They don't all have to be the same size. You can make them smaller. You can make them larger if you want. If you have groups like this, you can make one larger, a couple smaller ones like that. And then what I'm going to do is also place another one right up here towards the top of my arm. So I'm just taking my brush and flicking up from there and just kind of creating that flower, kind of like that. So that's kind of my flowers, the base of that. What I'm going to do next is just work with a couple colors in the middle. So if you take a look at my example here, my flowers, we've got that white base, and then we have a yellow next, and then an orange afterwards. So what you're going to do is, I'm not going to clean my brush off because we're just using white paint. I'm just going to dip it into the yellow now. And what I'm going to do is create the flower on the inside, kind of the pollen part. By doing the same technique, it starts in the same place. The only difference is these are a little bit smaller, the brush strokes. So you want it to be lower than where you ended with the white paint. So let me go in here. I'm just going to go and kind of create some of that yellow in the middle of each of the flowers. So it's starting at the base, kind of doing the same technique, and just placing some of that yellow in there. So I'll do this to all of my flowers. And this is kind of what I'm getting now. So you can see I still have the white paint showing, but now I've got the yellow. It's the same technique, and it's just a little bit shorter, my flick. So that way I have the white on the outside. So there's that. And then once you're done with that, the third color is just going to be orange off your palette. So I'm just taking my brush. No need to rinse it at all. Just dipping it into the orange. Going to do the same exact thing. These are going to be even shorter than the yellow ones. So just kind of going into the middle of the flower and adding a little bit of this orange. This is going to be the very, very center of it for you guys. So you just want to kind of keep that in mind, more towards the bottom of the flower. So I put a little bit of that in each of my flowers, and that's kind of what I'm getting there. So you've got 3 different colors in there right now, and that's creating your flowers. So I'm going to let you guys work on it for a little bit, and then we will go on to the next step as soon as I just fine-tune mine a little bit more. But again, you're using either the round brush or you can use a baby brush. I start with white paint first, go into yellow, and then I go into orange afterwards. Alright, so now that we've got our flower situated, the next part is adding in the thorns to the cactus. So you can either stick with this brush, or if that one was kind of hard to manipulate, I would say go with the tiniest brush that you have in your bundle, that baby brush. That would be the perfect one for smaller lines. What we're going to be doing now is adding the base of our thorns. So if you take a look at our cactus here, you can see they kind of go out from the side, facing either to the left or the right, depending on what side of the cactus they are. There's some on the edges, there's some in the middle as well. The only difference is this area right here, it's just facing out to the side of that bend. So, as opposed to this stuff is going out to the left or the right, this is going a little bit downwards or even over here, kind of at a diagonal, because that elbow is there. So for your paint mixture, you're going to do, you can do a new pile, or you can mix it into one of the ones that we've done before that's a brown color. What I'm going to do is a big scoop of brown and a little bit of white paint. So it's a little bit darker than our background. You can see kind of, this is the color right here. It's a lot darker than my background actually, and I'm actually going to move this a little bit forward just so I can show you some of these little needles. First thing I'm going to do also is show you on my palette here how to create this. Again, use very light pressure as you're doing this to get these little points for your needles. But all you're gonna do is you can go into your cactus and you can go from the side, and kind of like the flower, you can flick out and you're gonna create that thorn. So it can be one, it can be two, kind of going like a V like that, or you can even do groups of threes. So if you kind of take that V and then put a line down the middle, you kind of get like a bird's foot almost. But that's kind of the shapes that I'm working with in here. And all I'm going to do is go into my cactus, and generally I like to start with the outside edge first, so just kind of placing my thorns in there from the sides so you can kind of see them in there. If it's too close to the color of your background, you might want to add some more brown paint into it to make it a little bit darker, which I think I'm going to do to mine just so it's easier for you guys to see. But you do want it to kind of be a little bit darker than your background, just so it doesn't blend in. So I'm just going to take my brown now, and again, like I said, just very lightly. They can be one, they can be two, just even in here, I'm going and kind of creating my little thorns. Now, the harder that you push, the wider these are going to be, so just be very, very careful of that. I can start on the other side as well, just kind of putting in these. Kind of working my way through and creating all my little needles. They can be different lengths too. They don't all have to be the same size. You can start in here, kind of going into the cactus arms as well. And again, when I'm going into this bend, it's kind of going straight out to that. There, we're going in and putting in those little thorns just on the outside edge for right now. Once I'm done with that, what I'm gonna do next is add the ones in the middle of the cactus. You don't want them to just be on the outside edge, so I'm pretty much doing the same shapes, maybe like go down a row. So like if I can follow like an accent in there, maybe they'll all go, like if they were on an imaginary line, it would be, you know, kind of going the same way. So I'm just taking my brush, and whatever side is closest to you, so my right edge right here is closest, so all these thorns are pointing towards that way. I know it's kind of hard to see on the canvas there, but all my thorns are kind of facing inwards. Let me do this side because it'll show a little bit better on these darker colors. But you can see these are kind of facing towards the left side there, but they're all kind of in a row. I'm just going to continue doing this throughout my whole cactus, so that way we'll have the thorns on there. Right now it will look a little bit funny, but we are going to add a little bit of a darker tone and a lighter tone on top of these just to make them look a little bit more natural. But again, with this step, one thing that's really important is just how much pressure you're pushing down. Don't do it too hard, otherwise you're going to get really, really wide needles, and it's kind of hard to fix if that does happen. So start off small, and then you can make them wider if need be. But let me do mine real quick, and then I'll come back to you guys. Alright, so once you have your base of your needles on there, what you're going to do next is just kind of highlight and shadow them a little bit. So what that essentially means is the thorns that are towards the lighter colors in your cactus are going to get a lighter color on them just to make them pop. And then the ones that are on the darker side are going to be the same, but just with a darker color. So whatever brush you use last for your cactus needles, you just want to use the same one. You're going to rinse it off in your water cup, that way you can get all the paint out of it. And we're going to make our final color for the painting, which is a big scoop of white paint, little bit of yellow. So just a tiny, tiny bit. It's not a scoop at all. It's just to add a little bit of color in there. What you're going to get is this right here. So it's a very, very pastel yellow. We want it to be nice and bright so it will show up. But what you're gonna do is go onto your needles and just kind of highlight the ones on the side where the lighter parts of the cactus are. So I'm just taking my brush And it doesn't have to be every single needle, but you know, on these lighter portions, even kind of in the cactus, it's gonna make them pop a little bit more. So I'm just going in there and putting a little bit of this lighter color just on the side of the cactus that is the lighter portion of it. So I'm gonna avoid kind of the left side because that's where my darker colors are, but wherever I want these to pop a little bit more, I'm just adding some of this yellow onto that side, so that way I get a little bit of a highlight onto them. Once you're done with that, I'm going to do the same thing with a darker color on this opposite side. So for that, again, just rinse off your brush, and what you're going to be using is just the brown off of your palette. So as soon as you've got all the lighter ones in there, just going to rinse your brush off, and you're going to use the brown on the opposite side, so that way those have some darker spots in there. So let me rinse my brush real quick and I'll show you that process. Yeah, it's very important that we rinse the brush off, just because the lighter color can kind of turn this darker color into something that's not going to show up very much. But again, I'm just using the brown off my palette for the second color. And you're just going on the thorns, and wherever you want a little bit of a darker pop of color, just kind of placing some of that brown in there. So that way we've got the lighter part on this side, we've got the darker side on the opposite side. So I'm going to do mine real quick. It doesn't have to be every single needle, but we do want to go in there and just kind of accent things. So I will let you guys work on that, and then I will come back when we have that in place. Alright, so I got all those accents on my needles. Again, just to recap, the white plus the yellow was on the lighter portion of our cactus, so any thorns that kind of overlap on that, and then the dark brown just by itself was used on the thorns over on the shadow side. So let me kind of zoom in just so you can see what I did. So like you can see, like right here, there's a little bit of the lighter highlight, or on some of those, makes them pop a little bit more. And then on the thorns, you can see there's some darker colors in there where my base color was. Just give it a little bit of an accent. So especially like in here, you can see the thorns more because it's got that little bit of a highlight. So that's kind of what you're working with. But at this point, that's actually the last step for Saguaro and Bloom. So there is nothing else that you need to do for yours. The one thing I do always like to suggest is to sign your painting. So generally I can do it in like one of the corners here, or you can even do it on the back of your canvas. But it's always fun to sign it, just make sure that people know that you did it and stuff like that. But that's it for Saguaro and Bloom. So I always like to say at the end of my classes, you know, if you're fine with this, you know, sign it. It's great, but if you want to add things into it, if you need to fix things, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Some people will go in there and just add other colors they want in it, but you don't have to do that too. But I hope this brought a little bit of joy into your life today. Thank you for supporting us, and I hope you really, really like this painting. So we'll see you on the flip side, you guys.